I'd always been intrigued by the unknown. When I joined the government's Paranormal division, I thought it would be full of thrilling adventures, ghost hunts, cryptid sightings, solving strange disappearances. I figured I'd spend my days investigating haunted houses or mysterious occurrences, helping people get closure and writing reports about what I found. I never thought I'd end up in the most dangerous one, the division's most secretive, most hazardous department, reserved for the cases that went beyond what any normal investigator could handle. It started like any other assignment. I was fresh out of training, eager to prove myself. The government had a strict vetting process for the Paranormal division. They didn't just let anyone handle these kinds of cases. Only those with the right blend of skepticism and openness, someone who didn't jump to conclusions but also wasn't afraid to acknowledge when things got strange, made the cut. I thought I was ready. The briefing that day was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I sat in a small, sterile room in the back of the building, surrounded by walls of metal and concrete. The air was cold, and the fluorescent lights above hummed softly. A man in a black suit, Special Agent Fisher, stood at the head of the table, flipping through a stack of papers. His face was impassive, but his eyes held a sharp, calculating glint. He didn't look at me as he spoke, but his words held a weight I couldn't ignore. "We've got an assignment for you," Fisher said, sliding a folder across the table toward me. "But first, you need to understand what you're walking into." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. The first page was a list of names, victims, all gone missing. The second page showed photographs, abandoned buildings, strange symbols, and artifacts I couldn't identify. Each image was stranger than the last, and the location? A small town in the middle of nowhere, hidden deep in the mountains, far from civilization. The locals call it the Hollow, Fisher continued. This is a place where things don't follow the rules. People have gone in, but they don't come out. Or worse, when they do, they're not the same. I looked at the pictures again. A shadowy figure, standing motionless near an ancient stone structure, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. A woman, her face frozen in terror, holding something, an artifact, I assumed, clutched tightly in her hand. "This assignment is different," Fisher said, his voice lowering. "We've had operatives go in before, but none of them returned. The Hollow has a history. Some say it's cursed, some say it's been abandoned for centuries. But there's more to it than that. People don't just disappear in the Hollow. The place changes them." He paused, looking directly at me for the first time. His gaze was intense, and I could see the seriousness in his eyes. "You're not just investigating a haunted town. You're going in to neutralize an active anomaly. This is no ordinary assignment, and it won't be like anything you've dealt with before." I felt my pulse quicken. Neutralize? I thought we were supposed to be figuring out the paranormal, not eliminating it. I'd never heard of an assignment like this before. But then again, that's why I was here. That's why they called it the most dangerous one. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, though part of me knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Fisher slid a map toward me, pointing to the location on the outskirts of a forested mountain range. "You'll meet up with a local team of agents. They're the only ones who survived previous operations. Your job is to find out what's happening in the Hollow, what caused the disappearances and the strange phenomenon. If you find something, we need you to document it, and if necessary, neutralize the anomaly." I looked down at the map. The more I stared at the location, the more the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't just some quaint little town. It was a trap, a place where something had gone horribly wrong. I took a deep breath. And if I don't come back? Fisher didn't flinch. Then it's not your problem anymore. The room felt colder, and for the first time, I wondered if I was making a huge mistake. The drive to the hollow was long and uneventful, but the tension in the air was palpable. As we neared the outskirts of the small town, the landscape shifted. The trees grew thicker, and the roads became less maintained. It felt like we were entering a place that the world had forgotten. The sun was beginning to set, casting an eerie orange hue over everything, but the feeling of isolation in this place had already settled deep in my bones. I was riding with Agent Davis, a seasoned operative who had been in the Paranormal division for over a decade. He was quiet, but not in the way that made you comfortable. There was a certain coldness to him, a distance that suggested he knew more than he was willing to say. We didn't speak much during the drive, but I couldn't help but notice how his eyes kept flicking toward the rearview mirror, as though he was watching for something. I asked him once about it, but he just gave a small, cryptic smile and shrugged. "They'll be here," he said simply. "They always are." I wasn't sure if he meant the people or something else. As we approached the town, I could see the outline of the old buildings in the distance. They were decaying, their wooden frames sagging, and the windows shattered, as though the entire town had been abandoned in haste. A sense of dread washed over me, and it was almost as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The forest surrounding the town was too thick, the trees too tightly packed, making it feel like we were trapped in a natural fortress. I could feel the walls closing in around us, both physically and psychologically. We passed the town's border, the streets empty and silent, no signs of life, no movement. The houses loomed over us like dark, silent sentinels, their broken windows staring back at us. It was like stepping into a time capsule, but the time it held felt wrong, twisted. Davis parked the car in front of an old decaying building that appeared to be the only operational structure left. It had been converted into a makeshift base of operations, and the small team of agents I would be working with were already gathered inside. They greeted us quietly, nodding at me as I walked in. There was no warmth, no welcome, just wary acknowledgement. These were men and women who had seen things that they couldn't explain and who had been changed by them. Agent Walker, the team leader, was the first to approach me. He was an older man with graying hair and a hard, weathered face. His eyes were sharp, but there was a weariness in them that suggested he had seen too much. "You're the new recruit?" he asked, his voice low and guarded. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to sound confident, though my own nerves were getting the best of me. "What's the situation here?" He motioned for me to sit down as he began briefing me on the mission. "This town isn't like others. People don't come in, and they don't come out. At least, not in one piece. This place, it's like it's stuck in time. No matter what we've done, the same events keep repeating themselves. Disappearances, strange occurrences. It's as if the town is feeding on itself." He paused, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. "And we've only scratched the surface. The Hollow has its rules, things that we don't fully understand. Some say the town is cursed, others think it's a rift, a tear in reality itself. But one thing's for sure, if you break the rules, you'll pay the price." I felt a chill run through me at his words. What kind of price? Walker's expression hardened. The kind that takes everything. Your memories, your identity. Some of us have gone in, and they've never come out the same. Some, never come out at all. Davis nodded in agreement, and I could see the unease in his eyes, something I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't the kind of person to show fear, but there was something about this place that had made him cautious. It was clear that none of them were normal agents. These were the kind of people who had been exposed to things that broke the boundaries of reality, and they were all scarred by it. "We're here to stop it," Walker said, his voice low but firm. "We need to find the source of this anomaly and neutralize it before it spreads. But first, we need to learn the rules of the town, the ones we haven't figured out yet. And that's where you come in." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what role I could play in all of this. I had only been briefed on basic paranormal investigations, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was walking into. The reports that came back from the previous teams were fragmented, disjointed, and often nonsensical. Some of them didn't even make it out of the town at all. Walker stood up, walking over to a map pinned to the wall. He pointed to a spot near the center of town. The most recent incident happened here. A local, someone who had been here for years, disappeared without a trace. There are signs of resistance, scratches on the walls, remnants of a struggle, but there's no body. There's nothing. It's like he just vanished. He paused for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. "Tonight, we go in. We'll start our investigation there, and we'll stick together. No one strays. Follow the rules. Don't break them, no matter what." I glanced around the room, noticing that no one spoke. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. This wasn't just another job. This was a place where the rules were more than just guidelines. They were the difference between life and death. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. I had signed up for this, and now I was here. And as we prepared to enter the heart of the hollow, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made the right choice. The rules were simple, but there was one unspoken rule that seemed to govern everything in this town: never ask too many questions. We made our way into the hollow just after sunset. The team loaded up in 2 armored vehicles, their engines rumbling as they tore through the narrow, overgrown roads leading into the heart of the town. My nerves were on edge. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the vehicle felt amplified in the thick, damp air. The farther we drove, the more the world seemed to shift around us. The trees grew taller, the fog denser, and the landscape took on a surreal quality, as though we had crossed into a different dimension altogether. The temperature had dropped significantly, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me, trying to ward off the creeping chill. There was no sound other than the growl of the engines and the occasional radio static from the team's comms. The deeper we went into the forest, the more the landscape seemed to close in on us. The trees towered above, blocking out the sun until the only light came from the headlights of the vehicles and the faint, silvery glow of the moon. As we entered the town, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. The streets were eerily quiet. No signs of life. The buildings, once homes, shops, and businesses, were now dark, hollowed-out shells of what they once were. Some were crumbling, the wood warped and blackened with age. Others were sealed off entirely, their windows boarded up, the doors nailed shut. We parked the vehicles in the center of town, in front of what looked like an old inn. Its sign was barely legible, the letters faded and cracked, as if the town had long ago given up on being anything other than a place forgotten by time. As we stepped out of the vehicles, the air grew thicker, heavier. The shadows in the corners of the town seemed to deepen, to stretch, and that was when I heard it. The faintest hum, a low, buzzing sound, like something alive, lurking just beneath the surface. "Stay close." Walker's voice was a sharp command. He gave us a once-over, his eyes scanning the streets. "We've done our homework, but this place doesn't follow the rules. Watch your backs, stick to the plan." We gathered in a tight formation and began to move through the town, our footsteps the only sound that seemed to break the silence. Every building we passed had that same feeling of being watched. The streets were too quiet. It was as if the town itself had been holding its breath for years, waiting for us to arrive. There were signs of life, but they weren't human. As we passed a dilapidated store, I saw a glimpse of something in the window. Movement, shadows that flitted across the glass like figures that didn't belong. I stopped for a second, narrowing my eyes, but the figure was gone. Just a trick of the light. Or so I thought. As we moved deeper into town, I noticed something else. Every building we passed had the same strange symbols etched into its structure. They were carved into the wood, painted on the walls, and scratched into the glass. The symbols seemed to shift when I wasn't looking at them directly, like they were part of something much larger, something I couldn't quite understand. Each symbol had its own dark, unsettling energy, as if they were meant to keep something in or out. It was when we reached the old church at the center of town that things began to get truly strange. The church was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its stone walls were cracked and crumbling, and the tall spires that reached into the sky were half buried in the creeping fog. The doors, once wooden, had been replaced with iron, rusted and covered in the same symbols that we had seen on the buildings. There was a heavy iron lock across the door, but as we approached, the lock began to rattle on its own. I glanced at Walker, who nodded grimly and motioned for us to get into position. Davis and I moved up to the front of the building while the rest of the team took cover behind the trees. There was no sound, not even the wind, as we stood before the church's heavy door. Then the lock clicked. The door creaked open slowly, the sound grinding through the air like a scream, and the smell of stale air and something much worse hit us. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew, and the faint smell of rot lingered, making my stomach turn. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the presence. It was the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was watching us, listening to every footstep, every breath. The shadows inside the church were deeper, darker than they should have been. The stained glass windows, although cracked and broken, still emitted an unnatural light, casting strange shapes on the walls. Walker motioned for us to enter, and I followed him into the darkened church. The floor creaked beneath our feet as we moved further inside, and I swear I could feel the very ground shifting under me, like the building itself was shifting and adjusting, reacting to our presence. It was in the center of the church that we found it, an altar, covered in dust, with a large, ancient tome resting upon it. The pages were yellowed, worn with age, but what caught my attention were the symbols that were drawn on the open page. Those symbols, the same ones that were carved into the buildings and etched into the ground. They were part of the ritual, a dark ritual that had kept the town in its grip for centuries. And then, in the dim light, I saw something else, a shape. A figure standing in the corner of the room, watching us. It wasn't human. I froze, my hand still gripping the rifle, my breath caught in my throat. The figure in the corner of the church was like nothing I had ever seen. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't entirely something else either. Its form was indistinct, a dark silhouette standing motionless, blending into the shadows as though it had always been there, waiting for us. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the dim light from the stained glass windows, but they didn't seem to belong to a living being. I couldn't take my eyes off it. Something in the back of my mind screamed at me to look away, to stop focusing on it, but I couldn't. The longer I stared, the more I felt like I was being pulled into its gaze. It was as though the figure was reaching out to me, calling to me, but not with words. The feeling was deeper, primal, like it was trying to invade my thoughts. Stay calm. Walker's voice cut through the tension, his tone steady but low. He moved forward, his eyes never leaving the figure in the corner. Keep your distance and don't provoke it. Davis, standing beside me, took a step back, his hand on his rifle. What is that thing? I wanted to ask the same question, but my throat was dry. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its presence filled the entire room, suffocating us. It was as if it was absorbing all the light around it, drawing the very energy from the room into itself. Walker stepped forward cautiously, but his eyes never left the figure. It's not like the others. He spoke more to himself than to us, his voice barely above a whisper. This one is different. I had never seen fear in Walker's eyes before, but now it was unmistakable. The man who had led us through countless dangerous missions, the one who had survived things most people couldn't even imagine, was now visibly shaken. We've dealt with things like this before, Walker continued, his voice steady but laced with an underlying tension. But this is something else. I glanced around the church, trying to make sense of everything. The walls seemed to close in around us, the air thickening as the figure in the corner remained perfectly still. The glow in its eyes flickered briefly, as if it was aware of our thoughts, aware of the fear growing within us. What is it? Davis asked again, his voice urgent but hushed, as if speaking too loudly might provoke the creature. Walker hesitated, his eyes never leaving the figure. He swallowed hard. It's a manifestation of the Hollow's power, something born from the town's curse. I looked at him in confusion. A curse? You mean it's not human? No. Walker's voice was sharp now, but it didn't break the eerie silence in the room. It's not human. It's something older, something that's been tied to this place for generations. I wanted to ask more, wanted to understand why this thing was here, why it was watching us. But before I could speak, the figure moved. It wasn't a jerky motion, but a smooth, unnatural shift, like it was gliding rather than walking. My breath hitched in my throat, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It moved toward us, each step deliberate, but its movements were fluid, too smooth, too controlled to be anything human. It didn't walk. It seemed to float just above the floor. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with dread as the figure drew closer. I could hear the faint scraping sound of its feet against the stone floor, like nails on glass. The whispers grew louder again, overlapping and impossible to understand, but their presence made it clear we were not supposed to be here. Don't engage it. Walker's voice was firm now, as though he was given an order rather than a suggestion. We need to wait for the others. They're the ones who understand the rituals, the rules of the Hollow. But the figure wasn't waiting. It continued to move toward us, its glowing eyes fixed on mine, its face still shrouded in shadow. I felt a pull, a compulsion to move toward it, but I fought it. My body was shaking, but my mind screamed at me to stay still, to follow Walker's orders. It stopped in front of me, so close now that I could feel the cold radiating from its form. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel my breath quicken. The figure was silent, but its presence was overwhelming, its weight pressing down on me. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure whispered, but the voice was not its own. It was the voice of the land, the voice of the hollow itself. It was ancient, and it echoed through my mind, filling me with a terrible understanding. "This is our home, and you are intruders." Before I could react, before I could process the full meaning of the words, the ground beneath me shook violently. The room trembled, the walls cracked, and the floor buckled as though the building itself was being torn apart. The figure's eyes burned brighter, and the air crackled with an electric energy that seemed to reach out, pulling at everything around us. "You've disturbed the balance," the voice continued, louder now, "and now you must pay the price." I felt a sudden force push me back, sending me stumbling across the room. The ground beneath me shifted, and I could feel the weight of the house collapsing around me, suffocating me, pulling me into its dark heart. The ground continued to shake, the walls groaning and creaking as if the building were alive, its very bones cracking under pressure. I barely had time to catch my breath before I felt the pull again, a deep, unnatural force that seemed to come from all around. The air was thick with tension, and the temperature plummeted. I could hear the wind howling outside, but within the walls of the church, there was no escape from the suffocating pressure that seemed to close in around me. I stumbled backward, trying to find my footing, but the floor was shifting, like the entire room was being reshaped by an invisible hand. The artifacts in the corner of the church began to rattle, their movements jerky and chaotic. The masks, the statues, and the broken relics, everything was vibrating, as if they were trying to break free from their cases. I could hear them now, the whispered voices growing louder, more frantic. "You've awakened us." The voice of the figure echoed through the room, but it wasn't just a voice anymore. It was like the very walls were speaking, the air itself carrying the words. "You've disturbed the balance. Now you will face the consequences." The figure's eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light, locked onto mine. I could feel its gaze burn through me, the weight of it pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. I wanted to turn away, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if the ground itself was holding me in place, binding me to this cursed space. This place was never meant for your kind. The figure's voice was sharp, biting, filled with an ancient anger that seemed to reverberate through the room. You were never meant to find this place, to open the door to the hollow. I couldn't breathe. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. The hollow? Was that what this place was called? I had no idea what the figure meant, but the deeper I looked into its glowing eyes, the more I understood. This wasn't just a ghost, a spirit, or a curse. It was a manifestation of something far older, something that had been waiting for us, and now that we had disturbed it, we were going to pay the price. The ground beneath me cracked with a deafening noise, and the walls seemed to pull in, pressing tighter, squeezing the room into a claustrophobic nightmare. I felt the air leave my lungs, my chest tightening as if the entire building were collapsing in on me. The figure took a step forward, its movement slow and deliberate, but each step seemed to reverberate in the very core of the earth. It was drawing closer, its presence suffocating, its voice rising above the whispers that still filled the room. "You think you can leave? You think you can just walk away from what you've done?" The figure's grin grew wider, its jagged teeth glinting in the dim light. You are already part of the hollow now, and the hollow does not let go. I could feel the truth of its words sinking in, the weight of the realization heavy in my chest. The museum, the artifacts, the town, it was all connected. The hollow wasn't just a cursed town or a haunted place. It was alive, it was watching, and we were caught in its grip, unable to break free. But there was still a flicker of defiance inside me, a small, stubborn voice that refused to accept this fate. I wasn't going to let this thing, this force, take control of me. There had to be a way out. I couldn't let it end here. In the corner of my vision, I saw Walker and the rest of the team, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. They were paralyzed, unable to move, their bodies frozen in place as if the house had already claimed them too. The figure had them trapped, just like it had trapped me. But there was still something I could do. "You cannot take me," I forced out, my voice trembling but resolute. "I won't be part of this. I won't be a part of your collection." The figure's grin faltered for a moment, as though my defiance had caught it off guard. For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of something. Doubt, maybe. But then it stepped forward again, and the moment of hesitation passed. "It's too late," it whispered, the words curling around me like smoke. "You've already given yourself to the hollow." I took a deep breath and fought against the invisible force that held me in place. My mind raced as I searched for a way out, and then, in a flash of insight, I remembered something Walker had said earlier before we entered the town. The hollow has rules. The artifacts have rules. I wasn't sure what those rules were, but I had to try. I looked around the room, my gaze fallen on the ancient tome that had been placed on the altar. The pages of the book fluttered, as though beckoning me. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it, felt as if the book held the answers I needed. Without thinking, I forced myself toward the altar. The figure hissed, its form distorting with rage, but I ignored it. I grabbed the book, the cold pages burning against my skin. As I opened it, I saw the symbols, those same symbols that had been etched into the walls, the ones that had come alive in the town. And there, in the middle of the page, was a single line of text. "The hollow claims, but the hollow can be undone." The moment I read those words, a violent shudder ran through the building. The room twisted, the air pulsing with a force that made my skin crawl. The figure screeched, its form dissolving into the shadows, but its voice still filled the room, shrieking in fury. "You cannot undo what is done." But I knew I had to keep going. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about breaking the cycle. I could feel the pulse of the hollow now, vibrating through my bones, its energy wrapping around me like a tightening noose. The figure's screeching voice filled my mind, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the words I had read in the book. The hollow can be undone. There had to be a way. I had to find it before the darkness consumed everything. I glanced around the room, still feeling the weight of the figure's presence, even though it was no longer physically there. The whispers that had haunted the corners of my mind were growing louder again, like an insistent drumbeat in my head. The walls trembled as if the building itself were alive, its foundation shifting, groaning with the weight of centuries of accumulated darkness. I took another deep breath, clutching the ancient book tighter in my hands. The symbols on the pages seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, their twisted shapes pulsing with a malevolent energy. As my eyes scanned the text, I realized the answer wasn't just in the words. It was in the ritual. The Hollow's rules, the artifacts, the curse, they were all part of a pattern, a cycle, and the only way to break it was to stop feeding into it, to disrupt the ritual. But how? The figure's voice flared again, more insistent this time, as if it were trying to tear my focus away from the book, from the answer I was so desperately searching for. "You cannot break the cycle," it hissed. "You are the cycle." I shook my head, forcing my mind to focus. No, I wasn't part of it. I was fighting it. I could feel the coldness creeping closer, the air thickening around me, and I knew time was running out. I turned to Walker, who stood frozen near the altar, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. The others were trapped too, their bodies stiff with terror, but I could see in their eyes that they were watching me. They were waiting for me to make the move, waiting for me to figure out how to escape this nightmare. But I couldn't do it alone. I called out to them, my voice shaking but strong. "You have to break free from the cycle. Don't let it take you." Their eyes flickered with uncertainty, and then, one by one, they began to shake off the paralysis that had gripped them. Slowly, they moved, their limbs stiff at first, but with each step, their movements became more fluid, more controlled. They were breaking free, just like I had to. The figure was still watching, still angry, but I could feel its power waning. It wasn't just the building, the town, the artifacts. It was the fear, the belief in the curse that had given it strength. As we fought back, the figure's presence began to shrink, to diminish, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I turned my attention back to the book. The words I had read earlier weren't just instructions. They were the key. The ritual needed to be undone. I needed to sever the connection between the Hollow and the artifacts, between the town and the curse. The symbols on the page began to pulse faster now, like the heartbeat of the house. My mind raced as I pieced it together. I needed to break the connection, but not just by fighting the figure. I needed to destroy the artifacts, each one, the items that had been corrupted by the Hollow's energy. They were the anchor, the source of the curse. I stood up, my legs trembling, but there was no time to hesitate. I grabbed the nearest artifact, an old, cracked mask that had been hanging on the wall since we arrived. I held it in my hands, the cold stone heavy and lifeless, but now I could feel it. The Hollow's energy was still pulsing through it, still alive, and it was feeding on me. With a surge of adrenaline, I hurled the mask to the ground. The moment it hit the floor, the room seemed to quake. The shadows, which had been creeping toward us, recoiled, as if they couldn't bear to be near the broken artifact. The air grew lighter, and the oppressive feeling in the room began to lift. I could hear the others moving now, each of them starting to break free from their paralysis, picking up the remaining artifacts, throwing them to the ground with all their strength. The church trembled with each crash, the shadows shrinking back like they were being banished, pushed away from the center of the room. The figure in the corner screeched, but the sound was weaker now, its voice fading into nothing. Its form was flickering, wavering, as though it was no longer able to hold itself together. The final artifact was a dagger, long and silver, its blade still gleaming even in the low light. It had been the centerpiece of the display, sitting on the altar. But now, as I stepped toward it, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The blade had been stained, not with blood, but with the energy of the Hollow. The curse was in it, living within the metal itself. I reached for the dagger, and as soon as my fingers brushed the handle, I felt the surge of dark energy course through me. It was almost too much to bear, the weight of the curse threatening to overwhelm me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. With a forceful motion, I drove the dagger into the altar, shattering the dark energy that had built up in the room. The moment the blade pierced the wood, there was a violent crack, a thunderous sound that echoed through the church, and everything stopped. The figure, the shadow, the whispers, all of it collapsed, vanishing into the void. The air lightened, the oppressive pressure lifting, and the heavy darkness that had clung to the town began to recede. For the first time since we had arrived, I felt the weight of the curse break. The hollow was silent,